Good morning, everyone. I will just give it another minute here as attendees are still trickling in. We'll start in at 11:01. Okay, we will get going here. It's a full webinar today, so I want to make sure that we're respectful of everyone's time. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on careersinoilandgas.com probably by the end of today, and I will send out the recording to you after the session. We would like to start by acknowledging that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 Nations, the Piikani, Siksika, Kainai, Stoney Nakoda, and Tsuut'ina First Nations. We acknowledge the ancestral territory of the Siksika Sitapi, the Blackfoot Confederacy, and the home of Métis Region Number 3. This project is funded by the Government of Canada's Sectoral Initiatives Program. Opinions shared in this webinar are ours and do not necessarily reflect those of the Government of Canada. We welcome you to share any of the content we share today with your networks. However, you cannot charge for this information and you must reference us as the source. The research and content that we've created and developed has been done with the support of many other organizations listed here. I am Brianna Riley. I'm Program Manager for Petrol MI, and I'm here virtually with Lisette Cameron, our analyst, and Bimal Mehta. Bimal is Managing Director, Energy Intelligence at JWN Energy and Geologic Systems. Bimal leads the group's efforts in the areas of business intelligence and strategic insight, and JWN has recently merged with Geologic Systems. So they are a combined team that has extensive databases to drive insights for both Canadian and global energy intelligence. The Petrol MI division of Energy Safety Canada has a mandate to collaborate with industry, government, educators, and training agencies to support and advance the development of a sustainable and skilled and productive workforce. We specialize in providing oil and gas labor market data and insights, as well as resources for workforce and career planning. So here's today's agenda. I'll go through a bit of our methodology and scope, and then I'll hand it over to Bimal to discuss the assumptions used. Lisette will be going through the findings by region and subsector, and then we'll come back to me for some labor supply demand analysis and sharing the Outlook tool online. Throughout the session, feel free to ask questions, put them in the Q&A box. We can address some of them throughout, and we will have time at the end as they come up. So as I talk about our methodology, I am going to start a poll here, just asking a little bit about who we have on the call. So our Outlook is produced using a modeling system we developed in 2006. It's continuously refined, and the model produces labor demand projections for direct employment only in the following subsectors: exploration and production, which is onshore and offshore, conventional and unconventional, finding, extracting, and producing, except for the oil sands. Oil sands is done separately, and we include the extracting, producing, and upgrading of bitumen, specifically within mining, in situ, and upgrading operations. We also include pipelines, which is the storage and mainline transmission of oil and gas, as well as oil and gas services, which includes drilling and completion services, geophysical or seismic, and oil field services. So we do not include sectors in the downstream, construction, manufacturing, or LNG construction, or truck transportation. And because we only include direct employment, we do not include professional services such as IT programs that would come in and help a company. The model uses employment drivers to identify the workforce levels, which is based on capital and operating spending forecasts. So I will turn it over to Bimal to go into those forecasts a little bit more.
Great. Well, thank you, Brianne, and thanks for having me today at this webinar. Um, as you'll see as you read the Petro LMI report, they provide a outstanding level of detail around the jobs outlook for the industry. One of the inputs that's required to make that model work are the capital expenditures, the operating expenditures, and the production forecasts for the industry. These things underpin the industry activity, if you will, which then leads directly or indirectly to jobs. As you can imagine, the last year has been unprecedented. I used that word yesterday. I'll use it again today. We've never seen a downturn like the one we have in the oil and gas industry over the last 12 months. The pandemic has affected every corner of our lives, and no surprise, energy is one of the areas that was most actively hit. What we saw was that on the gas side globally, the impact was there, but was a little bit more muted. We still use gas for power generation, to heat our homes, for chemicals, and these parts of the industry were a little bit less affected. Oil was impacted in a massive way, largely over the transportation dynamics. As we stopped driving and flying, it had a direct impact on how often your tanks get filled up, and global oil demand collapsed. We're now in a recovery period, but to give you a sense of the proportion, prior to the pandemic, the world was consuming about 101 million barrels a day. Today, we're somewhere near 95 million barrels. So we've almost climbed back, but that last 5% will take probably another 18 to 24 months to completely close up, largely because a lot of that are things like bringing global transportation networks back, especially air travel. And that prolonged delay is one of the reasons why you're seeing a graph that you're seeing in front of you here. The industry is taking a very conservative approach, not just in Canada, but around the world. The same dynamics I'm going to be speaking of are also affecting US operators that are, say, operating in the Permian Basin, or Middle Eastern operators that are in OPEC. And the key themes that you're going to be hearing from oil and gas companies is a real focus on free cash flow and a very conservative way to tackle their business. They're very focused on cost reduction, capital efficiency, and they're focusing on things like debt reduction and ensuring that they're able to get their balance sheets in a reasonable place. Now, for the Canadian industry, what we're looking at here on this first graph is a view of oil sands versus the other parts of the oil and gas, combination of conventionals and unconventional in Canada. And what you can see is certainly on the oil sands side, we've had a challenging few years, and those challenges continue. And as you see, oil and gas capital dropped in 2020, and its climb back will be slow and will not reach 2019 levels for quite some time. And what's underpinning that are really two things. The industry is frankly getting far more efficient. Over the same time period, total oil sands oil production will be up 5%. And one of the benefits of the oil and gas industry is it's a very capital light type of business. So what we're not anticipating are major new capital projects being sanctioned, but the continuing sustainment and small growth capital that allow the operators to continue to increase production and continue to increase their position as a worldwide provider of oil. On the conventional side, we're seeing a much more active bounce back. Things dropped off much more suddenly to 16.3 billion in 2020, but we do see things climbing back to higher than 2019 levels by 2023. And certainly a lot of that is driven from the gas dynamic. What we're seeing towards the end of 22 and early 23 is a lot of new demand for gas. LNG Canada will be online, which will provide us the opportunity to export globally, but also there's several projects in Western Canada that are intended to consume that gas, whether they're petrochemical projects, power projects. That underlying demand in market will also have a beneficial role of driving additional capital expenditures. Do you want to hit the next slide? So when you take that the non-oil sands capex, a lot of that capital is spread across the country. Oil sands is overwhelmingly an Alberta phenomenon. There is some in Saskatchewan, but it is overwhelmingly an Alberta phenomenon. What you're seeing here is the breakdown of the conventional and unconventional oil and gas industries. And what you can see is British Columbia sees fairly robust growth all the way to 2023. And this is in anticipation of the LNG Canada project and the active work that's going on right now in places like the Montney. And we anticipate that there'll be continuing growth in that area. There's some very good investment propositions, and the Montney is a world-class asset and continues to get that attention and development. As you look at Alberta, it's a bit of a mixed story. You're looking at it's the single largest area of oil and gas development, but what you are looking at is a mixture of both oil and gas development, and the build back is slower. You do reach 2019 levels by 2023. And that climb again is more heavily related to the gas that you'll find in Western Alberta. Saskatchewan has a much more challenging story. As you can see, the capital expenditure dropped very dramatically in 2020, and the climb back is slow, much more weighted towards the tail end of the period. And a lot of that is related to just the underlying dynamics and uncertainty around oil demand. What we are going to see towards the end of the period here is greater market access options, whether it's the Trans Mountain pipeline, whether it's some of the other pipeline expansions, but also things to watch are the growing crude by rail dynamics that are emerging as the market is sort of wrestling with a post Keystone XL world. And the view is that by mid-decade, Saskatchewan will be back to where it was and will continue to see robust growth through the decade. The other area that I want to flag here is the rest of Canada, and because of the size of the market, we've lumped together a whole range of regions: the Maritimes, Northern Canada, and but primarily, overwhelmingly, this capital is focused on the Newfoundland oil and gas industry. And as you can see, there is a very sharp drop in 2020 and a very slow climb back as you look at much more of the sustaining capital and the operating capital, as opposed to very new large capital projects being sanctioned. And it is pointing to a challenging time ahead for the Maritimes industry. So with that brief overview, I will pass it over to Lisette, who will be able to then kind of unpack what this means from a labor market perspective.
Great, thank you, Bima. So according to our projections, the net hiring requirements for Canada's oil and gas industry will be just over 19,800 jobs over the forecast. And 40% of those, or about 7,800, due to industry activity, and nearly 12,000 due to age-related attrition. As you can see, the oil and gas services subsector is expected to see the most growth in net hiring over the next 3 years, followed by exploration and production. And about 600 net job losses are forecast over the next 3 years for the oil sands subsector. We can move to the next slide. Great. So starting with oil and gas services, the subsector employs the largest workforce in the industry. Last year, it employed about 66,000 workers, which represents 39% of total oil and gas employment in Canada. As with the recovery from previous downturns, the oil and gas services employment is expected to experience the most growth over the next 3 years, at nearly 8,400 positions due to renewed industry activity. As well, an estimated 4,600 oil and gas service workers will be eligible to retire over this period, for net hiring requirements of almost 13,000 workers. And the growth will mainly be driven by LNG development and oil and gas site reclamation work, as Bimal had pointed out. Looking at the exploration and production subsector now, in 2020, the sector employed the second largest workforce in the industry at close to 62,000 workers. And that's 37% of total oil and gas employment in Canada. Over the next 3 years, about 2,500 new positions are projected due to activity demand. And potentially 4,400 vacancies will be due to age-related attrition for net hiring requirements of 6,900 positions. This year, hiring to replace retiring workers is not expected to offset job losses in the E&P sector, where consolidations are expected to reduce mainly head office roles. Over the next 2 years, though, industry activity is expected to increase, driving hiring for about 6,200 jobs, in addition to a potential 2,900 vacancies due to retiring workers. And purchasing agents and officers, production and drilling managers, and oil and gas drilling supervisors are the top in-demand occupations in the E&P sector. There we go. So last year, the oil sands subsector employed about 28,000 workers, and that represents about 17% of total oil and gas employment in the country. This year, replacement for retiring workers is not expected to offset job losses resulting from consolidations and restructuring. Then in 2022 and 2023, retirements are expected to drive some hiring, but still won't fully offset the declines in industry activity, for net job loss of about 600 over the forecast. And finally, the pipeline subsector employed about 12,300 workers in 2020, and that's 7% of total industry employment in Canada. Hiring due to age-related attrition in this subsector is projected to offset any decline from industry activity, with net hiring requirements of just over 500 workers over the next 3 years. We'll move to the regional outlook now. So as you can see, Alberta is expected to see the most growth in net hiring over the next 3 years, followed by BC and Saskatchewan, while the rest of Canada is expected to experience some net job losses. We can move on. Great. So the bulk of Canada's oil and gas industry jobs are in Alberta. Last year, the province accounted for about 129,000 of the industry's jobs, or about 77%. Over the next 3 years, net hiring in the province is projected to be just over 15,100, with hiring due to age-related attrition outpacing demand from industry activity. This year, we're anticipating job losses as restructuring and consolidation continues. However, in 2022 and 2023, we see employment stabilizing, and we'll see the bulk of the net hiring in Alberta in oil and gas services. BC's oil and gas industry employed about 11,100 workers last year, and that accounts for about 7% of total industry employment in the country. The province is expected to hire for just over 2,800 positions, with over half of the demand coming from industry activity. This year, BC's job growth will be driven by retiring workers, as well as activity to deliver feedstock to LNG plants and reclaim oil and gas well sites. In fact, companies are already reporting labor shortages for oil and gas services workers. In 2022 and 2023, activity and age-related attrition will continue to impact hiring needs in BC. And we can move to the next slide. Great. Saskatchewan's oil and gas industry employed just over 10,000 workers last year. That accounts for 6% of total industry employment in Canada. Over the forecast, job growth in the province is expected to be strong, with the reinstatement of capital from oil and gas well site reclamation work spurring growth. Saskatchewan is projected to hire for just over 2,200 positions, with most coming from industry activity and just over 500 coming from age-related attrition. And then finally, about 15,900 were employed in the oil and gas industry in the rest of Canada in 2020, accounting for about 10% of total industry employment. Greater uncertainty is anticipated within the rest of Canada, and particularly Newfoundland and Labrador, their offshore industry, as Bimal had pointed out. By the end of 2023, about 800 vacancies are expected due to age-related attrition, but project cancellations and delays are projected to create job losses of just over 1,100 for total net job losses of close to 400. I will now pass it on to Brianne, and we will talk about labor supply demand analysis.
Yeah, so in addition to reporting on the industry activity that Lisette just shared, we also have a brief section in the Outlook summary about the labor supply demand analysis, as well as a spotlight on the topic. So I do invite you to check out the spotlight for more information on this, but to summarize, the labor supply pool is shrinking. The magnitude of downsizing since 2014 has really impacted the industry's attractiveness. Job seekers have gone to industries perceived to have greater stability, and the services subsector has been especially impacted as spring breakup already creates fluctuations in employment levels. These factors, combined with a decline in post-secondary enrollment in core oil and gas disciplines, have made it more difficult for the industry to attract and replace a maturing workforce. The pandemic has also led to challenges attracting workers from other parts of Canada, a decrease in international immigration, and a lack of foreign students at post-secondary institutions, which is creating gaps in the available labor pool that industry has typically tapped into. There's also been a brain drain from Alberta, where many of the industry head offices are located, and many of those jobs, as Lisette pointed out, have been impacted by mergers and acquisitions. Industry's increased focus on digitization and automation to realize efficiencies will mean fewer workers overall. Investments in technology are creating a disruption in the skills required by employers and in the industry supply chain. But there will be opportunities for workers willing to retrain or upgrade their skills. According to the World Economic Forum, 52% of oil and gas workers need less than 6 months to upgrade their skills for a digital workplace. So there are some opportunities out there as the labor shortages emerge. The expertise, equipment, and technology from oil and gas are transferable to the development of low carbon and renewable resources. Tech-savvy workers will be increasingly valuable, and Canada is already experiencing a talent shortage in that field. So if you're considering pursuing some digitization training, I think now is definitely the time. There are also opportunities for non-traditional talent, such as women and Indigenous peoples. There are many programs available for training, mentorships, and skills development. There are also opportunities for workers to rethink their skills. According to the World Economic Forum, the top skills for the next 5 years are critical thinking and analysis, problem solving, and self-management skills such as active thinking, resilience, stress tolerance, and flexibility. Thinking about labor shortages right now may seem far-fetched, but we do expect to see them. And as Lisette shared, some of them may be sooner rather than later. As companies prepare their talent pipeline, we have surveyed the unemployed and underemployed talent available, and we just released 2 blog posts sharing some of the findings. So I will share some highlights of those today, but you're more than welcome to check them out under the news section of our website. So our untapped talent blog posts focus on the surveying of over 2,000 unemployed and underemployed people from oil and gas. 42% of those surveyed were over 55. 77% had 15 years of experience. They were a wide range of backgrounds and talent and levels available. Most had worked in more than one industry, and 72% said their priority was to make a career transition, whether that was to a different role or industry, maybe a different work arrangement such as self-employment, or returning to training for something different career-wise. 80% of those surveyed were willing to retrain. So I do invite you to check out those blog posts for more information about that. And definitely let us know if you have any questions. And now I will share the tool itself, so you can take a look at what we have here. And hopefully you guys are seeing my screen with the website. Yes. The Labor Market Outlook tool is found under Labor Market Information, Labor Outlook. You will see here more information about our modeling system and methodology that we used, as well as the summary report that I talked about. On the first section here, you're able to view the Outlook, the net hiring requirements, including activity and replacement demand by subsector. You can click here to remove or click here to select a specific subsector you're interested in seeing more information about. Below, you will see the net hiring requirements. By default, it will show you the overall oil and gas industry across Canada, but you can select here to view information for a specific region or a specific subsector. And the text on the left-hand side here changes to reflect what you've selected. Below, you will see there is the Labor Market Outlook tool and the occupations most impacted. So this lists the hiring requirements for the net hiring requirements from 2021 to 2023 for the industry as a whole or by subsector. And here you can select the region you're interested in finding out more about, or the subsector you're interested in finding out more about. If you select the subsector, you can also narrow it down by occupation. Unfortunately, the regional breakdown we do not include by occupation or by subsector, but whatever you select here, you are able to see in a table below and download that data yourself so you can make your own fancy charts and graphs. I'm sure that's what you guys want to do, right? There's also links on the right-hand side here to the spotlights. So here is where you will find that labor supply demand analysis that I spoke about. It's listed here under identifying and addressing labor supply gaps. But we also have spotlights on the different opportunities and transitions that we see impacting the workforce in oil and gas over the next 3 years. So with that, I think we will open it up for questions if there are any. And if I can figure out how to go back to the slides, I will do that. And while you guys are thinking of your questions, I will also launch the poll on whether you found this information beneficial. Oh, I do have a question. How much has the industry shrunk since 2014?
I can answer that. So back in 2014, employment was at around the 226,000 mark. And we've seen that drop by close to 60,000 jobs since then. Employment in 2020 was at about 167,000. And so that's around a 25-26% drop since 2014. So there's been significant downsizing since 2014.
We also have one here about if we look back and track the accuracy of our predictions. Informally, we definitely do. Formally, we don't. It's something we have talked about, though. We typically start each Outlook process as a review of what came out of the previous year. We tend to do these on an annual basis. So as industry changes, we can adjust and adapt. But this is definitely something that we have been asked about before. So I'm sure it will be added to Lisette's to-do list in the near future. And then we also have a question here about soft skills. So I did talk briefly about some of the skills that the World Economic Forum expects to see going forward over the next 5 years. But there's also, we did a COVID survey, and as part of that, we asked employers what they expected to see for future skills. And so we do expect, or they did expect, communication skills, flexibility and adaptability, teamwork, technology and digital skills, problem-solving skills to be the most in demand. We also did a podcast on some of that information with BMAL that you're welcome to check out. Our podcast is called Not Your Grandpa Energy Industry. And you could listen to that that episode with BMAL where we got into that a little bit more. I don't know if you had anything else to add to the soft skills conversation.
I think you've summarized it really well. I think soft skills are all of those areas that are around how do you work with others, tolerance for ambiguity, those things. And this is a global phenomenon. We're entering a world where there's a lot of disruption going on, a lot of change. And one of the most challenging things that organizations are facing, and not just in the oil and gas industry, but in almost every industry, is having the right kinds of people who can look at that ambiguous environment and figure out where they need to go, help lead others through that challenging time. And our industry is no different. And in fact, those are really critical skills right now with organizations that are wrestling with energy transition, their future, their company strategies, but also, even if have all your chips in the oil and gas industry, how do you most successfully compete in a far more competitive marketplace, and what are you going to do about that? So I think that those are some of the soft skills that are showing up.
Mm-hmm. And then we have, how did COVID impact industry employment? Lisette, I don't know if you want to take that one.
I can take that one. In BMAL's presentation, he used the word unprecedented, and yes, definitely COVID has impacted the oil and gas workforce quite significantly. In June, actually, employment hit a very low point, and we saw about 30,000 workers unemployed in the industry. And if I recall, the unemployment rate was about 16% at that point. And the oil and gas services sector actually was hit even harder, and their unemployment rate was about 23% back in June. But the good news is that over the second part of the year, though, we've seen employment steadily recovering. And back in December of last year, we were nearly back up to pre-pandemic levels, and the unemployment rate was around 8 to 8.5%. So we are seeing some steady recovery. And if you're interested, we did publish a blog on the labor force statistics in 2020 and the impacts of COVID on employment. So if you're interested, I encourage you to take a look at our website, and there's a little bit more detail there about who it affected and the age groups that COVID affected as well.
We have another question here about, do we have projections for a longer time frame, the next 5 to 10 years, in terms of industry demand and job opportunity? So I guess I can start by saying, in the past, we have done multiple scenarios and we've gone out longer terms. And part of that has been due to uncertainty on what projects would be approved and what would kind of happen during the time frame in terms of oil and natural gas prices. At this point, we didn't feel comfortable going out longer term. There were less projects that were uncertain. Sadly, there were more no's than maybes at this point. So we did feel more comfortable with a shorter term forecast this year. That doesn't mean to say that we couldn't do a longer term one in the future. I don't know, Bimala and Lisette, if you have anything to add.
I would say, in fact, prior to COVID, we were planning on a longer term outlook. We were looking at a 10-year outlook. I think we felt confident that we kind of knew what projects were coming online, and we felt fairly confident that we could look out at least 10 years, but sadly that was shelved.
So maybe I can top up in a couple different places. And this is related to that earlier question of how do you look back at the accuracy of your forecasts? So one of the things you'll find is, one of the things that's often the most challenging to predict at any given time is, what's the price of oil? If any of us know what that looks like, there's millions of dollars awaiting you, and you wouldn't have to necessarily be on this call. That being said, what we find when we're doing forecasting is there tends to be a fair bit of accuracy if you're starting to look at the 12 to 18 month time horizon. Oil and gas companies tend to have longer planning windows internally, but what they announce to their shareholders is generally an outlook of what their capital expenditure is going to be for the following year. And every major operator in Canada puts out a guidance in December of annually. So in December of 2020, they released a fair bit of their guidance on what 2021 is going to look like in terms of capital expenditure, production, and everything else. And that gives you a fairly accurate read on jobs in 2021 and into 2022. And it's one of the things that led to why PetroLMI and our team focused on this 3-year time horizon. Where there's huge uncertainty is certainly COVID was something that, you could never really predict how this is going to turn out. And every day we're learning something new. And, we're even dealing with a situation where we're not sure when the vaccines are all going to be finished because of the most recent news on AstraZeneca. And those things impact how many times you get in a car, when you're going to get on a plane, and ultimately the demand for oil. So the reason for the shorter time horizon is we really have a hard time seeing past the next 18 to 24 months into a post-COVID world. Now, when you ask the question of a bit of a longer time horizon, 5 to 10 years, I'm going to take a bit of a jump and make, what you might be asking is there a future in oil and gas? And unequivocally, yes, there is. Energy transition is going to take decades, not years. You'll see a lot of headlines around oil is finished, gas is finished, it's all moving to renewables. The reality is these things take much, much longer. All of those other energy transition phenomena are real. And, solar, switches to renewables, battery technology, electrification, these things are very real phenomena. They are going to change demand for oil and gas. Energy transition will occur. It's just the pace of that transition is actually rather quite slow. And one of the other things to keep in mind is Canada continues to have very strong resources and exceptional talent pool. And access to some very big markets, namely the United States. And what that means in terms of the outlook for Canadian oil and gas is it will remain one of the big producers for many years to come. It'll probably be one of the the last producers on earth. Amongst that grouping, people often focus on the last producers in the world when we're through energy transition will be the Saudis, the Americans, the Russians, but you also want to put the Canadians on that list. Outstanding talent. The WCSB, the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin, is a world-class basin, and certainly there will be prospects for many years to come. I think what's always challenging is the mismatch between we had such a rapid super cycle boom period between 2000 and 2010 or 2014 really, and we've been sort of in a low cycle since then. We are anticipating, some of our long-term forecasts point to a fairly robust bounce back mid-decade as market access becomes less of a challenge, whether it's the LNG projects on the West Coast or the Trans Mountain Pipeline or some of the projects that are certainly in flight, like the Enbridge projects. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more context on some of that, what might be on your mind behind that question.
We do also have another question here about if we investigate where people go who leave the industry. So I guess I'll take a first stab at this. We do look at labor force data on a monthly basis. Petrol MI reports on that. You can see it usually the first Friday of every month. April, it will be the second Friday since the first Friday is Good Friday. But typically you'll see that up on our website. As part of that, we look at the overall labor force. So the employed and unemployed who are still actively looking for work. So we do monitor how that number shrinks or grows over time. If we aren't able to look at it on a monthly basis of where those people are going if they're leaving, but we're definitely aware if they are leaving. We do, through the untapped talent survey that we talked about, we do ask people to complete the survey on an ongoing basis to update us about any new training they've taken or any new areas that they have got a job in, or even an internship and stuff like that. So we track those people based on their postal code. So we ask that information so that we can track them through time. We also have a few other projects that are focused on helping workers to transition into areas where their skills are really transferable and we think that they will have the most success. So we are looking to expand our website in the near future. Later this year, you will see we will have more transferability information online for you. Right now, we do have information about the transferability on 29 different occupations in 9 different industries. But it's pretty narrow, 29 only occupations compared to the 155 that we have profiled on our site. You will see in the spotlights that I shared, there's a lot of information there about what areas adjacent to oil and gas are growing and where there might be opportunities. We didn't talk much about it here in today's webinar, but yesterday we got into a little bit of the technology demand. And so a lot of the digitization of the industry is happening through third-party contractors. So companies like IBM, like Amazon, who are helping companies to bring their systems online into a more automated state, I guess, for lack of a better term. And those companies do need people with oil and gas experience, people who understand the business side of things. So I think there are a lot of opportunities in sort of those tech companies. Yeah, the other areas that we do focus on transferability too are renewables, LNG we've talked about a bit, petrochemicals. There's a lot of petrochemical industry growing here in Alberta specifically. Construction, construction crews are very transferable to upgraders, turnaround work. There's pipeline construction, LNG construction. There's a lot of opportunities there to get your hands onto something and move into either back into oil and gas or continue working in construction. And I feel like I'm missing one. High tech we did talk about. And clean tech is the other one. So clean tech, very similar to high tech in that understanding the way that industry works and understanding where the pain points are from an industry perspective can really help to develop technologies to support the industry. We did do podcast series on career changes as well. So the podcast, once again, is Not Your Grandpa's Energy Industry. And the last 5 episodes that we did were on people who had either made a career change or people who could help you to make a career change. So that is something, if you looked at the labor or you look at the labor supply spotlight, no, I'm wrong, the Untapped Talent blog post, we did find that people haven't been tapping into the career agencies and the career counselors that they could be. And I think that if you are looking to change your career and either leave or go into a different part of oil and gas, getting the help of a career counselor would be definitely beneficial. They can help you to identify your skills and work on your resume and what are those transferable opportunities for you. I don't know if there's anything I missed.
No, you are very thorough.
Oh. I think that's our last question of the day. So we give you back just over 10 minutes and thank you so much for joining us today. If you do have any questions going forward, feel free to reach out to us. Our email addresses are on this final slide here. And as I said, I will be sharing the recording of the webinar to all registered participants later today, and they will be up on the website by tomorrow. Thank you very much and hope you have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, thanks.